I'm Chris Motes, and this is Faith in Politics. On this broadcast, we range from the soul to the state as we cultivate those virtues and explore those principles that help us live well as faithful Catholics in this great land. Well, welcome back for another episode, folks. Summer is here. Very excited. We just got through our summer primary this last week, June 7th. I hope you all are excited about the approaching general election in November. For those of you that will have races in your district, some of you out there I know won't have races. I was just calling up a Catholic who won a race the other day, and hey, he is a legislator-elect, doesn't have a November election, which is very exciting. And of course, June, this is Dobbs month, and we will bring you all the latest and greatest on that very important forthcoming decision as soon as it breaks, which is expected to be really at any moment now. As we are recording here on June 10th, you're going to be hearing this on June 13th or 14th. The week of June 13th, we've got decision days. The Supreme Court has announced it is going to be releasing decisions on both the 13th and the 15th. So those potentially could be Dobbs days or later in June, no later than the end of the month. But the moment you have all been waiting for, as you know, Chris Motes, I've slid over to Chief of Staff, the Diocese of Sioux Falls, and we have been in the hunt for an executive director of the South Dakota Catholic Conference. I am very pleased that, without further ado, drumroll please, this is the episode in which we get to introduce the successor to the South Dakota Catholic Conference. So, without any further delay, Michael Pauley, Rapid City, South Dakota. Michael, welcome to Faith in Politics.
I'm pleased to be with you, Chris.
Michael, I am just really delighted to introduce you to the Faith and Politics audience, for all those that are invested in the work of the South Dakota Catholic Conference, or just even casual listeners to this podcast. Grateful that you're on the program. So grateful that you're taking over the reins of the South Dakota Catholic Conference. And we're just going to spend a little bit of time today visiting and kind of unpacking a little bit who is the next director of the South Dakota Catholic Conference, Michael Pauley. So, Michael, there's so much that we're going to talk about, and I'm hoping that we're going to just spend more time together on Faith and Politics in the future as you slide into the driver's seat and I sort of fade into the color commentary role. But just to kind of maybe help listeners get to know who you are. This is a huge moment for the Catholic Conference, and we all want to know, who are you? So would you mind just sharing? Let's start with who are you? Where are you from? Tell us a little bit about kind of your background, your upbringing, and what makes you who you are.
Sure, Chris. Well, thanks. And, at the outset, I just want to say that more than one person has remarked to me over the last few days that I have big shoes to fill. And I certainly agree with that. I can succeed you, but I cannot replace you. I'll just put it that way. And it's just been a real pleasure seeing what you've done in really 5 short years with the South Dakota Catholic Conference. And it's no exaggeration to say that South Dakota is a better place to live because of what you have accomplished over the last 5 years. Some of the incredible bills that have been passed with the support of the Catholic Conference. So I do feel just very humbled to step into this position, and I'm just grateful for you helping make the transition very easy. With regard to just who am I grew up in a military family. Early childhood was the 1970s, and most people will, who were alive back then, will recall that the 70s were sort of an era of great political cynicism and also cultural dissipation, you might say.
Yeah.
But I actually was sort of insulated from that. Grew up in a fairly traditional community, military family where, loyalty to family, loyalty to the church, and loyalty to the country was sort of just ingrained in our culture. And so went to, my education was K through 12 public schools. I think the schools I went to, I would characterize them as undistinguished, but maybe less troubled than a lot of what we see in public schools today. And then went to school at Georgetown University, where I was enrolled in the School of Foreign Service. And that was kind of a turning point in my life when I got to Georgetown.
Well, and I mean, I find that part of your background so fascinating too, and I think it's just going to be incredibly helpful for you as Catholic Conference. I mean, because in a school of foreign service, Georgetown or elsewhere, like at the heart of the training is really it's statecraft. Is
Yeah.
that a fair assessment?
Yeah, we actually did get instruction on how to communicate, effectively, and so even though I never pursued the foreign service as a career, I do feel that the things that I learned there, have stayed with me throughout my life. Another thing that I would remark about Georgetown, and some of your listeners who are familiar with the institution may grin a little bit at this, is that um, I actually received a very good Catholic formation while I was at Georgetown. And again, some people will find that humorous because Georgetown has, I would say, a deserved reputation as an institution that struggles with issues of its Catholic identity. A lot of troubles there, both when I was a student and extending even to today. But there was a core group of Jesuits there, men like Father Thomas King, Father James Shaw, Father Robert Spitzer, who I still stay in touch with to this very day. And those men were just really instrumental in forming me into the person that I am today. And so, despite Georgetown's shortcomings, through a lot of discernment, I managed to hone in on the people who could give me a really good formation there. And I'm just, really grateful for what those men have taught me.
Yeah, and for some listeners who maybe are kind of aware of the catalog of books that are published by Ignatius Press or kind of various corners of the internet, even like Focus, Fellowship of Catholic University Students, has had this relationship with Robert Spitzer. That's where I first encountered him actually as a young person,
Okay.
was through
Yeah.
Focus at one of their conferences. But these are like intellectual giants. So what a privilege and treat to really receive formation firsthand. And I'm personally hopeful that in the future we could maybe explore some of their thought and their works. Father Shaw especially has got a great, well, not to the
Yes.
exclusion of the others, but I'm just more familiar, I guess, with his work in politics and political
Yes.
writing. So yeah,
Yep.
that's wonderful. What a great
Yeah.
formation.
Yeah, I took Christian and medieval political theory from Father Saul when I was at Georgetown. And I always remember him because he'd come to class every day and say, I just can't teach you everything you need to know in an hour. So here's a stack of 10 books. And if you really want to be learned in this stuff, you simply have to read these 10 books. Don't count on getting it all from me. And I
That's
always,
awesome.
yeah, he had the biggest reading list of any professor I had at Georgetown.
Well, and so Schall is Schall. And for listeners that like to read, you could go on the internet and Google Father Schall's lifetime reading list. And he's got this list that's out there. And it's like, if you want to be a well-formed mind, here are the 100 or 200 books you simply must read.
Oh, that's so funny. I actually didn't know that that was online. So,
It's really great. So anyhow,
yep.
that's a great formation, and I think your time at Georgetown is really just a great bedrock in statecraft, because really the Catholic Conference is bringing soulcraft into statecraft, and for that bachelor's degree, it's going to be great. So Michael, let's pivot, and just after college, is when you started first getting involved in politics. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I worked a number of jobs on Capitol Hill and also in various states. And, it's, I won't kind of walk through the whole resume because that could get kind of dry. So maybe just focus on one really important experience for me was I had an opportunity in the early 1990s to work as a legislative aide and also communications director for Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey. And some of your listeners will be familiar with Congressman Smith. He's been the longtime chair of the pro-life caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives. And so for several years, I was kind of in the very thick of all of the battles related to abortion and other dignity of life issues that were raging on Capitol Hill back at that time. And, he was just a real important role model for me. I think of him as a modern day William Wilberforce. And in fact, he himself really identified with William Wilberforce, the great anti-slavery leader in Great Britain. And Congressman Smith was a big big inspiration to me. I once asked him, when you have to go down and do these debates on the floor, and you're under all this stress, how do you prepare for it? And he looked at me and he said, Michael, read the Psalms. He said, I never go into debate, without reading the Psalms first. And at that time in my life, I must confess, the Psalms were not of interest to me. I thought it was so much bad poetry, but Congressman Smith, said, you need to read the Psalms. And so
Beautiful.
I have gotten much more deep into the Psalms and really incorporating that into my spiritual life. So anyway, he was a great mentor, and he's still there. That's the amazing thing, is that I was working for him back in the early 1990s, but here we are, 2022, and he is still fighting the good fight there in Capitol Hill.
Yeah, really, Chris Smith, a giant of a pro-life legislator, as you say, and just the political dynamic in New Jersey too, like really a statesman. He understands there's an art to politics, and he's very much committed to mastering the art by every testimony I've heard. So wonderful reputation. So also, Michael, you live in Rapid City, and you're a married man. That's your vocation. Can you tell us just a little bit about your family?
Sure. Well, my wife and I married kind of late in life. We were both actually pushing 40 at the time that we got married. But despite our advanced age, God saw fit to bless us with two wonderful children. We have two girls, ages 12 and 9. And I'm very blessed. I have a very forgiving wife and well-behaved children, and just feel very blessed that way. And we love life in Western South Dakota, where it's much warmer than the part of the state that you have to live in.
Yeah,
at least during the winters.
This is true. I always enjoyed my my wintertime treks to the west, because you're going to get some of that sunshine, and it's certainly true. Well, Michael, a couple other things I wanted to visit about, and as I was sort of teeing up some notes for our conversation, there's this confluence really that is going to make you such a wonderful Catholic Conference director. I firmly believe, because you possess this mix of both love of church, love of Christ, at the same time as love of country. And so when I was kind of framing this for you, love of church and love of Christ, as you were sort of responding to me with your own notes and thoughts, I was really struck by the first sort of note you wrote, which is this question: why are you Catholic? And I was so struck by this, Michael, because in fact, this is a question that I've asked guests on the program. I was asking regularly different guests for, hey, tell me, why are you Catholic? Or, if they weren't Catholic, tell me why you're a Christian. So tell us. I mean, this is the question that you've sort of teed up. Michael Pauley, why are you Catholic?
Yeah. Well, as you and I were discussing off air, Chris, I had lunch with an evangelical colleague once, and the subject of our lunch is we were talking about database management systems. So, this was not a conversation where you had any inkling that any matter related to faith or spirituality was going to come up. We were talking about database issues, and then just out of the blue, this evangelical guy asked me, why are you Catholic? And I'm thinking to myself, okay, there has to be a correct response to this question, but without any thinking, the words that came out of my mouth were, because I can't think of being anything else. And I remember at the time feeling very unsatisfied with that response, because it lacked theological depth. But then, with the passage of time, I've come to realize that, it was probably a good response because it was heartfelt, and because I truly feel that way, that, when I think about everything about what it means to be Catholic, the grace of the sacraments, the incredible history of the church, history of Christendom and how it's helped build up the culture that we live in today, the art, the music, just the everything Catholic is got such depth and such beauty in it that I could never imagine sort of walking away from that inheritance and sort of saying, I want to try something new. That thought just has never occurred to me.
Yeah, it's just such a beautiful answer too, because I think, relating it back to Representative Smith, I can't imagine being anything else. That's almost like the psalmist's response. right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's from the heart directly.
Right. Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but one of the things too that I'm really struck by is just this conversation with the evangelical friend, which I think these sort of friendships are is so near to the work of the Catholic Conference. There's such a
Hmm.
beautiful collaboration, I think, in this age. And one of the things I know that you've been influenced by, or one of the people, is Richard John Newhouse, who is a
Yes.
Catholic convert, had been a
Hmm.
Lutheran pastor, became Catholic, but then with Chuck Colson, founded this Evangelicals and Catholics Together, and they produced this journal. And can you
Yeah.
maybe just say a little more about, because I know you've had a long career working in policy and politics, just about some of your relationships with others who aren't Catholic, but co-laborers in the vineyard, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, some people have referred to the Catholic Evangelical Partnership as foxhole ecumenism, and
Mm,
I really identify with that because um, out of necessity, I think we've been forced to not ignore our theological differences, but in a certain sense to draw a line around that, set it to the side, and say we need to collaborate on those areas where we agree, because the forces of the secular culture and other negative trends in society are just such an imminent challenge, that we need to confront. And so I've actually for several decades been very blessed by collaborative relationships with non-Catholic Christians, and have learned a lot from them. I greatly admire my evangelical friends for their love and devotion to Scripture. It has, in a sense, there was a time in my life where I didn't read Scripture regularly and
mm,
study it and meditate on it, and I actually have incorporated that into my life, in part because of the challenge posed by my evangelical friends. And so, I have to give them credit in a sense that many of my evangelical friends have helped make me a better Catholic. And also because of the questions they ask, why do you believe this? And why do you believe that? And when you don't have a good answer, that doesn't sit well. And so I've profited greatly from my relationships with those folks.
One of the things too I'm struck by, Michael, that is just going to be such a wonderful thing that you bring to uh, the work of the Catholic Conference in the state of South Dakota is, I mean, you're a very very articulate, reasoned. You're a smart person. I mean, I hate to be too blunt about it, but and I've heard that testimony from other collaborators that have appreciated that the Catholic view, if you will, or the Catholic position
Mhm.
on especially on these moral issues that are kind of at the heart of lots of different policy debates. It's all
Yeah.
well reasoned stuff.
Hmm.
It's not simply like, well, that's God said so, therefore. It's actually that no, God isn't. He's there's a rationality to all of this.
Right.
That and kind of back to these Jesuits at Georgetown, that I'm really excited to see the way in which you sort of take this teaching, and further unpack that in the future.
Yeah.
Okay, so this other element that I want to talk about of what is the Catholic Conference up to? This love of country, this patriotism. Can I know you're just you're sort of bursting with love of country. Can you help us understand where does this come from in the life of Michael Pauley? Like,
Yeah.
what's your formation and background?
Yeah. Well, as I alluded to at the beginning, I grew up in a military family where, I think in a sense, patriotism was second nature. And then in our town, it almost just seemed to be natural that people had great loyalties to local institutions, whether it's the local VFW or the Rotary Club or the local Scout troop or whatever. People were heavily involved in things. And as a young person, I didn't reflect on that reality deeply. It's just, felt like this is just the way things are. But of course, now looking back on it, I realized that I was getting a formation. And the message was that a life well lived is a life lived for others. And I
Mm,
saw that in the community where I grew up. And, there's another little experience I had. This would be in my teenage years. It kind of ties into this whole theme of patriotism and reflecting on what that really means. I was in a government class in my high school, and we were doing some research project related to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and what does liberty and freedom mean, for an American citizen. And in the course of doing research on this, I stumbled across this quote from a political science professor at Columbia University. And I wish I could remember his name. That's long since receded into the gray matter. But I remember the quote like I read it yesterday. This professor said that the essence of American liberty is the freedom of each and every person to go to hell in whatever way they choose. And the context of the quote made it clear that, he was speaking approvingly of this understanding of liberty. He wasn't doing this as a parody to show that this was a distortion of a correct understanding of liberty. He was sort of embracing this, I guess what you could call a libertine understanding of what our freedoms mean as American citizens. And it was kind of an epiphany moment for me when I read that, because I remember, kind of taking a deep breath, and something inside me said, this isn't right. This can't be right. And I remember talking to my teacher about it in school. And I showed him the quote, and I said, tell me this. I said, if every citizen lived a life of, let's just say, complete self-absorption and self-indulgence, as the professor said, basically trying to get to hell through whatever route most pleases them, our country would fall apart, wouldn't it?
Yes.
And the teacher just thought about it for a long moment and said, yeah, you're right. The country would fall apart if everybody embraced that understanding of liberty. And so that was kind of, just as I said, like an epiphany moment for me, where I realized that there are two different understandings about what it means, what to be an American citizen. And it wasn't until many years later that I encountered the writings of Pope John Paul II, where he writes so eloquently about how an authentic understanding of freedom is the freedom to do the good. And when I read those words, it tied it back to that moment I had in high school, where I said, this can't be what freedom really means, because if that's what freedom really means, then people like my father, who served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, he wouldn't have gone off to Vietnam to risk his life and die for freedom, if we understand it that way.
That's right. And what comes to mind is a quotation that we've, I think, repeated often on this show. But at the heart of liberty is the right to define one's own concept of existence, of meaning, of the universe, and the mystery of human life. This great, the sweet mystery of life passage, as Justice Scalia referred to it. It's, of course, written by Anthony Kennedy, kind of sadly, who did receive a Catholic formation, but it's completely bunk. You're right. And I this is maybe something that we could just unpack, in the future too. But, one of the things that I'm starting to witness and hear from is just younger people. I don't know if this is what we'd call it a movement yet, but some of the millennials, some of the Gen Zers, who are kind of having this epiphany of like, nobody ever told me this stuff about the true nature of freedom and happiness. Actually just comes through having an orientation towards freedom, that it's for something. So whether we're talking about, sex or casual drugs or all sorts of different sort of things that can be super degrading and empty. So
and the formulation that Father Spitzer likes to give for that is, it's the distinction between freedom from versus freedom for. And that in our culture today, there's just a very I don't know if it's the dominant strain, but it's a major strain in our culture that sees it as freedom from responsibility, freedom from rules, freedom from any kind of restraints on what I want to do, instead of seeing it as freedom for the good, freedom to to contribute to human flourishing, both your own and of those around you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great pithy way to put it. I remember I was in the Marines and somebody gave me, or somewhere I found the book, What Are Freedoms For by John Garvey. He, I think, was either teaching or a dean at Catholic University of America Law School then, but yeah, a completely different and necessary understanding. What a great thing though that you had this experience in high school that is kind of stayed with you. Can you, we talked a little bit about Father Newhouse already. Can you just share a little more about how he influenced you and his understanding of like a rightly ordered freedom and the relationship between the faith and the public square?
Yeah. Well, I first encountered the writings of Father Newhouse, specifically when he was writing on pro-life issues. He was, very much a vocal critic of Roe versus Wade when it came down. And so that's how I was first introduced to him. But then I started reading all of his other writings on these broader issues of the relationship between faith and government. And of course, as you know, Chris, his kind of landmark book on this subject was called The Naked Public Square, which came out, I think 1984 was when that book came out. And there's a brilliant quote in that book, and I printed it off here before we went on air, but he says, "The public square will not and cannot remain naked. If it is not clothed with the meanings borne by religion, new meanings will be imposed by virtue of the ambitions of the modern state."
Yeah.
And I remember reading that, and it really crystallized something in my mind, which is that I was raised, at least, what I was taught in school, in public school, was this sort of concept of the state as being completely neutral on matters of faith and religion and even morals. And but what Father Newhouse reminds us is that that's a fake neutrality. The public square is not going to be strictly neutral. If it's not informed by values that come from our Christian heritage, it's going to be informed by values that come from a different ideology. And I think we've really seen that unfold over the last couple of decades.
That's absolutely right. And Michael, we are at the end of our radio time now. So I just want to say goodbye to our radio listeners. Thank you for tuning in. If you want to hear the rest of this conversation, you can go to sdcatholicconference.org and click on our audio content. We'll see you next time. And back for our podcast listeners, we're going to keep talking because there's a little bit more here to actually unpack. And the quotation you just shared, Michael, is just so latent with, that's rich stuff that we could spend a lot of time on itself. Just sort of the meaning that we have to have in things. Like this idea of like neutrality is there's something completely false in it that I think has been there's been like a greater awareness of this in more recent years as certain elements of progressive ideologies just getting a bit more militant with kind of taking over and claiming quote unquote neutral spaces. The public library's drag queen story hour being sort of a prominent example of like, well, no, yes, neutrality. Everybody gets to use this space.
Yeah.
But we haven't actually answered the prior question of, is this good and at the service of the common good in the community, that is the purpose of government and a life together.
Yeah.
So, that maybe is a great point to transition into just kind of stepping towards the future and what you see as kind of a vision for the future of the South Dakota Catholic Conference and the ways that it can really serve well all the citizens of the place in which we call home.
Yeah. Well, certainly one aspect that I really want to work on is brainstorming on ways that we can bring about a greater engagement on the part of the laity in the political discussion in South Dakota. And obviously you've done, fantastic work on this over the last 5 years, but when it comes to better forming the laity and encouraging them to get involved. There's never any end to the work that needs to be done. And you're well familiar with this concept that there's
Yep.
far too many of the faithful who think of politics as it's something dirty, it's something little bit, the words escape me, but something that is not pleasant to engage in, and they have really, it's sort of internalized this concept that religion and politics just need to stay apart. They just don't belong together. And that's kind of a heresy that we have to really always be working against. And, the bishops, of course, came out with their very impressive document called Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship. I've read this. It's a good document, but it's almost 50 pages long. And so, what I look at is I think very few people are going to invest the time and energy, to read something that long. And so when I'm trying to explain to people, what is the Christian basis for being involved in politics, I like to go to something much shorter and more simple, and that is the Lord's Prayer. So every single time we go to Mass, we pray the Lord's Prayer, and we hear those words, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven."
Yeah.
And what I like to remind people is that here's what Jesus did not say. Jesus did not say, "Thy will be done on earth, but not in the realm of politics."
Right.
Thy will be done on earth, but not in Hollywood, or not in the corporate boardrooms of Fortune 500 companies. Jesus didn't set any boxes, when he talked about that our mission needs to be, bringing about the Lord's will in the temporal realm. So when we think of politics, politics certainly isn't the only mission field. And in certain contexts, you might even argue that it's not even the most important mission field. But nevertheless, it is a field where we have to be engaged. And I'm reminded of the old saying that you've probably heard this before. People say, "You may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you."
That's right.
And
That's right.
I think especially over the last couple of years, with the whole response to the COVID epidemic, I think a lot of people who maybe ignored politics and felt like they could just sort of safely take it for granted, their eyes were sort of opened. They woke up and they realized that, wow, government leaders can decide whether or not you're allowed to go to church. Government leaders can decide whether or not your business is allowed to stay open. And so I do think we're living in an era where people are maybe just a lot more engaged and aware that they have to care about who holds power in our system.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to keep that framework in mind. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. But of course, with the art and science of politics, we also have to talk about where the rubber meets the road. So in really concrete terms, the rubber meeting the road, what are some of the issues that you see kind of in the fore for the South Dakota Catholic Conference in the years ahead?
Yeah. Well, certainly, first and foremost, what you alluded to at the beginning of the show is that we may be on the verge of seeing Roe v. Wade overturned. I'm hopeful for that. I don't, despite the leaked opinion, I'm of the view that I take nothing for granted.
Yes.
I think it's possible that the decision could go in a number of different directions, but I do think there's reason to hope that we're going to see Roe v. Wade overturned before this month is over. And so I think that needs to be at the top of the list, is what do we need to do with South Dakota statutes to make sure that they offer the most thorough protection for preborn life. Now, obviously, South Dakota has got some great laws, many of which you have helped pass over the last several years. But yet that statutory framework is calibrated towards kind of the legal regime that was allowed under Roe versus Wade. And now if Roe v. Wade is sort of out of the way, we need to just take a fresh look at all of those statutes and make sure that we've got the most protective laws possible. I guess some other issues that I'm really looking forward to working on would include the right of conscience legislation. And, you've had a lot of background with this, Chris, especially in the context of healthcare professionals.
Yeah.
We have so many threats to the conscience rights of healthcare professionals, not just with regard to abortion. That issue's been with us for some time, but now as we get into this whole new world of rampant confusion over gender identity, there's all of these issues cropping up with the conscience rights of healthcare professionals to not be involved in things like so-called gender transition medical treatments. So I think that we need to really focus hard on that issue. And then I guess two others that I am near and dear to my heart: educational choice. There's much room for improvement in South Dakota's laws in terms of getting parents the options they need to educate their children in the best way they see fit. The passage of the homeschooling reform law last year was a huge step in the right direction.
Yep.
But there's a lot of other things, obviously, that we can do and should do, to make school choice more viable in South Dakota. And then one final issue I think we have to be concerned with is that there is this marijuana issue on the ballot yet again. It's back with us, the recreational marijuana ballot initiative. And I think there's just a huge education gap on that issue. I think far too many people, Catholics and non-Catholics alike, just don't take the issue all that seriously, perhaps. They think, marijuana, it's not really a big deal. And the truth is that it is a big deal. This is a drug that has many adverse effects, not only on the individuals who use it, but on those who relate to them, their employers, et cetera. And so I just think that there's a lot of spade work that needs to be done in kind of opening people's eyes and getting them to realize that you don't want to go there. You don't want to go to this regime of complete unregulated marijuana.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for kind of giving us a primer, because I totally agree that these issues are going to continue to be really front and center in the years ahead. Michael, as we kind of wrap up our time here, I just want to maybe kind of three things in closing. First, just a bit of news. For anybody that's going to be in the Rapid City area on June 22nd, which is the feast day of St. Thomas More and Bishop John Fisher, martyrs of the English Church. Thomas More, of course, patron saint of politicians, statesmen, lawyers. Bishop Peter Muich is going to be celebrating a Red Mass at 11 a.m. Mountain Time at the Cathedral of Our Lady of Perpetual Help on June 22nd. That is the feast of Thomas More. It's in conjunction with the State Bar Convention, which is out there, but really anybody is welcome to come, whether you're a lawyer, a politician, or others that simply want to pray for the good of this profession, the good of our country. And then next, just want to remind you, stay tuned for Dobbs news. We're gonna bring you the latest as we wait for this all-important decision to come out. Stay tuned for more on Dobbs. And then finally, just as we look to the future with Faith in Politics, a show that I think we're on our 102nd, 103rd episode now, something like that. Been at it for a couple of years. Michael is going to be sliding into the anchor seat. I'm going to be sort of fading into the background. I have so much fun doing this. Michael is graciously will be permitting me to, kind of join from time to time as much as you want me to. So I look forward to kind of spending more time with you all in the future. But Michael will be your very able host and anchor moving forward. So with that, I just want to say, everybody, it's been great. I'll see you around, I'm sure. This is Chris Moats, and I'm signing off of Faith in Politics.
I'm Michael Pauley. Thanks for joining us today, and until next time, live well.